Today's video is a little different. I haven't been able to film brand new projects recently, so I thought I'd do something fun and pull together 9 of my absolute favorite card making hacks from previous tutorials, the ones I personally use over and over again in my own projects. These include tricks for stamping narrow sentiments perfectly, gluing vellum without marks, fixing die cutting issues, creating dimension from scraps, and even getting a full letterpress look with your dies. Basically, these are the little tricks that make crafting a lot less frustrating and a lot more fun. So if you've missed any of these tips before, you'll see all 9 of them are right here in one video. Let's dive in. Let's start with one of my favorite die cutting hacks I learned from Jennifer McGuire that helps me layer and space die cut letters uniformly. I've cut out a couple of layers of the word happy. I saved the negative die cut piece for this because I'll place the letters back into the negative space, which makes aligning the die cut pieces incredibly easy. It's basically doing the alignment work for you. So I'll start placing the letters back into the grooves and start layering. I'll keep layering and popping the die cuts out so they don't stick to the negative piece, since a little bit of glue might squeeze out during the process. And I'm sure you'll agree that glue always seems to squeeze out exactly where you don't want it. This is done, and see how easy that was? No fiddling with sticky die cuts trying to align them correctly. Now let me show you how I'll use this other negative die cut piece to help with spacing, which will prevent the die cut from getting stretched or skewed. I want to be absolutely sure about placement, so I'll hold the negative piece exactly where I want the sentiment and then use a tape runner to temporarily adhere the die cut. This step allows me some time to adjust things if needed before I commit to the placement, because once glue goes down, there's usually no negotiating with it. You can see how the negative piece keeps the spacing perfectly even, and the die cut hasn't become misshapen either, considering it's quite delicate. Once I'm happy with the alignment, I'll adhere everything permanently using this strip of cardstock to slide glue underneath without anything shifting. Now I want to place the word happy over the top. Before gluing it down, I always check the spacing and arrangement. And a great way to do that is by using the shadow die that comes with it to see where exactly the letters need to go. That looks about right. So now I can pull the die away and use the negative template to adhere the rest of the letters so they're aligned and evenly spaced. This part can be a little fiddly, and I'm being extra careful because acetate and stray glue aren't good friends. And there we go. Wasn't that fun? Next is one of my own hacks for layering die cuts more efficiently. I wanted to stack 2 layers together for reinforcement as well as some extra dimension. But since I'm lazy, instead of cutting each layer separately like I did in the previous hack, I glue down 2 sheets of cardstock together before die cutting. There's just one consideration. If the cardstock is heavy, you will need to pass it through the machine a few times at least to get a clean cut. I'm using Spellbinder's brushed black cardstock, which is fairly thick, and instead of cutting 2 layers and gluing them together afterward, I'll first glue the cardstock layers together and then die cut them. This eliminates the need for gluing intricate layers individually and risk getting them sticky and wet or misaligned. And it saves a surprising amount of time. This next tip is great at getting a clean die cut, and I learned it from Gina K. I usually don't go beyond 2 layers because thicker stacks can be harder to get a clean cut. When that happens, simply flip the entire sandwich so the cutting side of the die faces upward and run it through the machine again. Most of the time, that second pass will cut perfectly, but you may need a third pass depending on the die, the cardstock, and also the pressure in the die cutting machine. But I do believe that every die cutting machine has its own little personality. This method gives you a beautifully thick sentiment layer, and I can cut more double layers if I want even thicker sentiments. I find it so much easier to do it this way. Now let's look at a few vellum gluing hacks, because vellum can be tricky to adhere without showing glue marks. Here I created a sentiment with a vellum shadow layer. Vellum is translucent, so even a little bit of glue can show through, and once it shows, it really shows. So here's the trick. Apply glue behind the sentiment and let it sit for a few seconds so the glue becomes tacky. You'll know when the glue has become slightly tacky when the shiny wet look fades into a matte finish. Once it reaches that tacky stage, place the sentiment onto the vellum. I picked up this hack from Kathy Zilski, and it's been incredibly helpful since I use vellum quite often in my cards. Even if I reposition the sentiment slightly, the vellum won't get stained by wet glue. And as you can see, there are no glue marks at all. Now I want to show you another hack I learned from Jennifer McGuire on how to perfectly align and stamp narrow sentiments, especially when working with narrow label and banner dies. Here I'm using one of these label dies and a very narrow sentiment. Since the banner is quite narrow, centering the stamp on the banner can become really tricky. If it stamps off center, it's going to be ruined, and I'm sure we've all had at least one stamping moment like that. You could stamp first and then die cut, but that isn't foolproof either because the die may not get perfectly positioned. This method I'm demonstrating solves that problem, plus it's great if you're batch creating sentiments like I'll show you in just a bit. First, I die cut the label and save the negative piece. As you can see, I've already saved these templates from previous projects. You will need a stamp positioner for this. I'm using my MISTI since that's what I have. I'll first place a piece of scrap copy paper inside the MISTI and stamp 2 sentiments on it. Next, I'll align the template around it, making sure the sentiment looks perfectly centered within the negative space. Let me cut out a few banners and we'll get started. I'm saving these negative pieces for another hack. I just made sure everything is centered, but I still like to measure twice and cut once, so I'll double check the placement with an acetate sheet. Another fantastic alignment trick I learned from Gina K. The stamped sentiments look perfectly centered, so I'll clean the acetate sheet with some rubbing alcohol and move it out of the way and stamp the labels. I'll add a tiny bit of temporary glue behind the die cut label since the stamp seems really sticky. Fortunately, the ink didn't smudge while I was pulling them off. Now that I have a stamping jig, it's going to be so easy to batch create these sentiments. And now I have a perfectly centered sentiment, which instantly gives a card a more professional finish. And if you like watching my videos and find them helpful, I'd love for you to give this video a like and do subscribe to my channel. And if you want to join me for monthly craft along sessions, just click the join button that should appear on the screen somewhere below. Once I'm done stamping everything, I can use a glue eraser to remove the temporary glue from the template and store it for the next project. Remember these leftover paper strips? I always save them because they're perfect for creating custom dimension, and I hate wasting my supplies anyway, so these come in handy. Sometimes I run out of the narrow foam strips and these paper strips come to the rescue. Have you noticed that cardstock scraps have a mysterious way of multiplying in the craft room? At least it does in mine. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to use these strips as dimensional backing instead of foam. I just need a few strips that are roughly the same width, and these being from the same cardstock, they're the same thickness. Thickness only matters though in case you're using dimension to level out a die cut. Otherwise, it's not really important. This brings me to my next favorite hack, using non-stick paper for gluing and other sticky business. I save all the backing sheets from my double-sided adhesive and sticker packs and use them as a non-stick surface for gluing. It really makes cleanup easy as it protects my work surface, and I can easily discard the sheet if it gets sticky. Anything that reduces craft room mess is a win in my book. I also use my non-stick paper when I need to cut custom sized strips from my foam tape. It's so easy to handle longer strips of foam when I stick it down on the non-stick paper first before trying to cut it down to size. I have another hacks video where I share plenty of ideas for using non-stick paper in your craft room, and I'll share a link to that video in the video description. At the cost of sounding like a broken record, I have to admit this next brilliant hack I learned from Jennifer McGuire has got to be among my top faves. It uses press and seal to transfer an entire arrangement at once. Here I'm arranging florals and foliage. Once I'm happy with the arrangement, I'll place a small piece of press and seal over the top and gently press it down so the elements temporarily stick to the wrap. Then I'll lift the entire arrangement, and as you can see, the arrangement stays intact. Next, I'll apply adhesive behind the elements. This is also a good time to add your dimensional foam tape if that's what you're after. Finally, I'll place the arrangement onto the card front, and after pressing it down for a few seconds, I'll carefully peel away the plastic. If there are loose elements, it's much easier to glue them down at this point since the main arrangement is already in place. Honestly, this hack has saved me hours of rearranging tiny elements. You should be able to find the press and seal on Amazon or your local grocery store. I haven't found a good substitute for it so far, but if you've tried something else and it worked, please do share it with the rest of us, as I've heard a few viewers mention they couldn't source it. Finally, let's create a faux letterpress effect that can elevate your card design by a mile, if not more. I'm using an old cover plate die from Waffle Flower, and I cut out 2 pieces from heavyweight Neenah Classic Crest cardstock. I'll glue these together so it gives me some nice dimension, since I'll be using this to emboss. I could use the cover plate die as well, but the outcome will be quite a bit more textured. I want the texture to be more subtle. I recently demonstrated the various ways to create texture using cover plate dies in my 9 card making mistakes video. You'll find the link in the video description. If you aren't using a Spellbinders machine, please check your user manual for the correct sandwich for embossing with cut shapes. You definitely need a rubber mat for this, and in case you don't have one already, again, please check Amazon. Before embossing, make sure your rubber mat is completely clean. Mine was actually quite dusty, even had a strand of hair on it, and that's not the kind of texture we're going for here. You can see that platform B shows the sandwich combination. I missed showing this in the video, but I usually spray my card panel with a fine mist of water before embossing. I'll tape the die cut and the moistened card panel together with a tiny piece of washi tape to prevent them from shifting around. Now I'll place the cardstock sandwich face down on platform B, cover it with the rubber mat, and then add the adapter plate on top, and I'll run it through the machine. And here's the big reveal. Look at that beautiful texture. It almost looks like a faux letterpress effect. It's so subtle that it won't overpower your focal point, and it's prominent enough that you can use it to make a clean and simple card by just adding a sentiment. I know I mentioned it already, but I recently made a video on 9 card making mistakes you can easily fix to take your card making to the next level, and you can watch that video here.